Welcome to another episode of People Vault. You know, when a massive corporation like Pepsi pays a pop star $5 million, which they did in 1989 for a global sponsorship.
A massive deal for the time.
Huge. And they fully expected this safe, family-friendly return on their investment. But instead, what they got was a music video featuring burning crosses.
Yep. Burning crosses, stigmata.
He had a dream sequence involving intimacy with a black saint.
Yeah.
I mean, they got the Vatican officially condemning the video. It's this global PR nightmare that completely panicked Pepsi. They pulled the commercial, canceled the sponsorship deal entirely, just full retreat. But, and here's the craziest part of that entire story to me, the pop star actually kept the $5 million.
She kept the money.
Kept the money, secured a #1 hit that topped the charts for weeks, and just completely won the trade.
It really is one of the most brilliant, just chaotic business maneuvers in modern entertainment history. And honestly, it perfectly encapsulates the entire phenomenon we are unpacking today. We are essentially exploring the ultimate contradiction.
We are. We're mapping out the blueprint created by Madonna Louise Ciccone.
The queen of pop.
Exactly. Most people know her as the queen of pop. But, you know, our mission for this deep dive into our stack of sources isn't to just list off her hit songs chronologically. We really want to understand the actual mechanics of her rise. Like, how does a young woman arrive in New York City in 1978, completely unknown, with exactly $35 in her pocket?
Literally just $35.
Right. And transform into this billionaire cultural architect? A person who, by the way, literally has an academic subfield named after her.
Madonna studies. It's a real thing.
It's wild. But if you've ever thought about personal branding or retaining creative control when you're dealing with massive corporate machines or just the sheer power of reinvention, Madonna literally wrote the playbook that you are reading from.
Absolutely. And, looking at this incredibly comprehensive biography of her life and the sources, what stands out immediately isn't the glamour. It's not the MTV gloss. It's the mechanics of her autonomy.
Right.
We are exploring the story of a woman who operated in a heavily, heavily male-dominated industry and just absolutely refused to let anyone else steer the ship.
And to really grasp that autonomy, I think we have to bypass the 1980s pop star image for a second and go back to the human psychology that drove all that ambition. So she was born in Michigan in 1958, and there is this pivotal, really foundational trauma very early on in her life.
Yeah, it's incredibly sad. When Madonna was just 5 years old, her mother died of breast cancer.
Which is just a devastating loss for any child.
It is. But Madonna later articulated how it fundamentally wired her personality. She described that loss as making her a, quote, lonely girl who was searching for something. So she wasn't just sad. She felt this massive void, and that void kind of ignited a fire in her to be seen, to be undeniable. She's actually said that she wasn't rebellious in the traditional sense early on. She cared deeply about being good at something because she desperately wanted to be somebody.
And you can clearly see that drive in how intense she was as a student. I mean, she was a massive overachiever. She got straight A's. Her dad, Tony, who was an optical and military engineer, he actually set up this system where he paid her $0.25 for every A she brought home on her report card.
$0.25 an A, right?
Yeah, and she was a cheerleader. But beneath all that intense discipline, there was this bubbling, very deliberate, rebellious streak, wasn't there?
Oh, for sure.
Because the sources mentioned she would do cartwheels and handstands in the school hallways, or she'd hang upside down on the monkey bars and just lift her skirt in class purely to get a reaction out of the boys.
And that combination is so revealing. You have the discipline of a straight A student combined with the deliberate, provocative subversion of a class clown.
Right.
She learned very early how to master the rules of whatever system she was in, and then she would intentionally break those exact same rules just to captivate an audience. That right there is the foundational psychology of her entire career.
It totally is. And that psychology is what gives her the sheer nerve to make this massive leap in 1978. She drops out of college, where she actually had a dance scholarship, by the way, and she moves to New York City.
Which was not the New York City of today.
No, not at all. She later called it the bravest thing she ever did because she had never even flown on an airplane before. She'd never taken a taxi, and she lands in Alphabet City.
Right.
Which, for anyone listening who doesn't know, in the late 70s, Alphabet City wasn't this gentrified, expensive neighborhood. It was a gritty, dangerous, incredibly unforgiving epicenter for underground punk and art.
Completely.
So she's surviving on those $35. She's working as a hat check girl at the Russian Tea Room.
Yeah.
And at one point, she's even living in an abandoned synagogue in Queens.
And That environment, it forced a very harsh reality on her. The sources detail a really horrific incident from this time where she survived a traumatic knife-point assault on the roof of a building. Yeah, and her reflection on that assault is chilling. But it's crucial to understanding her armor. She said the experience gave her a taste of her own weakness, showing her that despite all her strong girl show, she couldn't always save herself.
Man, that is heavy, but it does completely recontextualize this invincible, almost aggressive armor she wore for the rest of her career.
Exactly.
And out of this intense grit, she actually forms a band called the Breakfast Club, which, wait, so the Queen of Pop actually started out playing drums and guitar in an indie rock band.
She did.
Drums and guitar. I mean, realizing Madonna started in a freezing basement punk band changes everything. That's like finding out Steve Jobs started his career by repairing antique typewriters, you know?
Yeah.
It completely reframes how we view her musical foundation.
What's fascinating here is that those rock and punk roots are the actual engine of her work ethic. Yeah. She was not a polished pop princess manufactured in a boardroom by label executives. She actually formed another band called Emmy, which was literally a punk rock band. So she was sleeping in basements, writing her own songs, and just developing a completely self-reliant musical DNA.
She was the definition of a hustler. Like, she would take her 4-track demo tapes to these underground nightclubs like Danceteria. She would physically track down influential DJs like Mark Kimmons and practically force them to play her music on the dance floor.
She completely bypassed the traditional music industry gatekeepers because she understood they weren't going to just let her in.
Right, they weren't looking for her.
No. So she took her music directly to the audience. She tested it in real time, and when the crowds responded, the record executives suddenly had no choice but to pay attention. That ground-level leverage is exactly what led to her signing with Sire Records, which was a subsidiary of Warner Bros.
And that brings us from the gritty origins to the absolute explosion of her fame. We get her debut album, Madonna, in 1983, and then the monumental release of Like a Virgin in 1984, a cultural earthquake.
Literally. And almost immediately, she starts weaponizing that massive success to challenge cultural norms. Let's talk about the 1984 MTV Video Music Awards.
Oh, the wedding dress performance.
Yes.
It is a masterclass in subverting symbols.
She comes out on top of a giant wedding cake. She's wearing a bridal gown, but she has a belt that says boy toy, and she's wearing white gloves. And then she just proceeds to roll around on the floor of the stage.
And you sort of have to look at the 1980s cultural landscape to really understand the mechanics of this. She took the most sacred symbol of female obedience and purity.
The white wedding dress.
Right, and she turned it into a display of autonomous, unapologetic sexuality. And conservative organizations were absolutely outraged.
But that outrage was a calculated metric for her, wasn't it?
Oh, completely. She realized very quickly that controversy was a highly effective currency, which kind of brings us full circle to that 1989 Pepsi debacle we discussed at the start.
Right, like a prayer video. Yeah. When she released that video with the burning crosses and the Black Saint, she wasn't just trying to make conservative groups angry. She was elevating her provocation to a global systemic scale. She basically forced a massive corporation to choose between art and commerce, knowing full well she held the ultimate leverage, which was the attention of the culture.
See, here's where it gets really interesting to me, because during this massive rise, the media constantly labeled her a control freak. Even going all the way back to the recording of her very first album, she famously clashed with her producer, Reggie Lucas.
She didn't like his final mixes.
Right. She didn't like his mixes of her songs, so she demanded control over the sound. But I'm looking at this and thinking, if Prince or Bruce Springsteen went into a studio and demanded different mixes for their own albums, no one would bat an eye.
Not at all.
So was she actually being difficult, or was the 1980s music industry just completely allergic to a woman with boundaries?
Well, this raises a really important question about the structural sexism of the industry at that time. Historically, music production was heavily male-dominated.
Yeah.
The standard expectation was that women were hired to simply stand in the booth and sing the songs that were written and produced for them by men. But Madonna actively set out to dismantle that entire system. She didn't just sing. The sources note she is credited with registering over 300 works as a songwriter.
Over 300.
Over 300.
Yeah.
She co-produced her albums. She directed her own visual narratives. So the term control freak was absolutely used as coded language to diminish a woman who simply refused to be managed.
She actually addressed it directly at one point. She said, quote, "I like to have control over most of the things in my career, but I'm not a tyrant. To me, to have total control means you can lose objectivity," end quote.
She wanted collaboration, yeah.
But she demanded it happen on her terms. And that demand for autonomy culminated in 1992 when she established Maverick, her own entertainment company.
And the Maverick deal is arguably one of the most important business milestones for female artists in history. She secured a $60 million advance.
Wait, 60 million?
$60 million. And a 20% royalty rate from Time Warner.
Okay, to understand how wild that 20% royalty rate was, you have to look at the industry standard back then. Major established artists were lucky to get 10 to 12%.
If that.
Right. And they almost never owned their own master recordings. Madonna didn't just negotiate for a bigger slice of the pie. She forced Warner Bros. To give her the entire kitchen.
She bought the table, really. And Maverick became one of the most successful artist-run labels ever. They later signed massive acts like Alanis Morissette.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it proved her business acumen was totally equal to her artistic vision.
But, when you design a brand entirely around breaking taboos and pushing the edge, you eventually run out of safe taboos to break.
That's the danger, yeah.
You end up having to push into genuinely uncomfortable territory to get that same reaction. And in the early 90s, the pendulum of public opinion swung hard against her.
It really did. 1992 was the flashpoint for that. She releases her 5th studio album, Erotica, and simultaneously publishes a massive, highly explicit coffee table book simply titled Sex.
The Sex Book. Photographed by Stephen Meisel, right?
Yes.
And it was just filled with sadomasochistic imagery, bondage, same-sex intimacy. It was everywhere in the media. And the cultural backlash wasn't just conservative pearl-clutching this time. The general public seemed genuinely exhausted by it.
The backlash completely overshadowed the music. Erotica actually became her lowest-selling album to date at that time, which is remarkable because music critics actually gave the album very favorable reviews.
Oh, really? So the music was good?
The music was great. But the visual provocation had finally eclipsed the sonic substance in the eyes of the consumer.
And it even bled into her personal life. She was dating the rapper Vanilla Ice at the time, and he famously broke up with her because he was furious that he was included in the sex book without his consent.
Right.
And then you have the infamous 1994 appearance on The Late Show with David Letterman.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. She used relentless profanity, which required massive broadcast censorship, and she literally handed David Letterman a pair of her underwear on national television, urging him to smell it.
And the media critics were circling after that. They were writing think pieces asking, is the emperor wearing no clothes?
Right.
The consensus seemed to be that she had lost her musical direction and was now entirely reliant on just cheap shock value to maintain any relevance.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yep.
Because this is the ultimate crisis for a personal brand.
Okay.
How do you pivot when the public turns on you, but your entire identity is based on being unapologetic?
It's a tough spot.
She couldn't just issue a standard public relations apology, because saying "I'm sorry" would completely destroy the illusion of absolute autonomy that she spent a decade building.
So she executed what biographers call a strategic softening. She didn't retreat, and she certainly didn't apologize. She simply changed the aesthetic landscape.
How so?
Well, in 1994, she releases the album Bedtime Stories, pivoting to a much gentler R&B-infused sound. And it worked brilliantly. It gave her longest-running #1 hit with the song Take a Bow.
And then she goes to Hollywood. She fiercely campaigns for the lead role in the film Evita. She wins the role, wins a Golden Globe for Best Actress, and right around the same time in 1996, she becomes a mother, having her daughter Lourdes.
Right.
So she triumphs on screen, embraces motherhood, and presents this highly refined, mature image, all without ever once admitting defeat.
It was a masterstroke of image rehabilitation. But, if we dig into the academic sources, we see that the critiques of her work during this era go far deeper than just puritanical outrage over explicit photos.
Yeah.
There was a very real, complex sociological debate about her method.
Yes, and I'm really glad you brought this up, because the sources present two very different interpretations of her legacy here. On one hand, you have scholars like communication professor Sutphili, who argue she was an, quote, almost sacred feminist icon.
Right.
And the argument there is that by unapologetically owning her sexuality and forcing the mainstream to confront it, she empowered a whole generation of women to stop apologizing for their desires.
But the counter-argument challenges how she sourced that empowerment.
Exactly.
The primary critique revolves around cultural appropriation. Madonna borrowed incredibly heavily from marginalized communities.
Yeah, she lifted aesthetics from underground BDSM culture.
And most notably, she brought the ball and Vogue dance culture, which was created by Black and Latino LGBTQ communities in New York as a safe haven, into the global mainstream with her song Vogue.
And critics argue that while she definitely popularized those aesthetics, her highly privileged position as a wealthy, straight, white woman did very little to structurally aid the actual marginalized communities she lifted the imagery from.
Right. She got the millions of dollars and the cultural credit, while the originators remained on the margins.
It is a deeply valid tension that sociologists still study today, because her peculiar genius was her ability to move freely across these incredibly diverse cultural terrains, absorbing what she found and translating it for Middle America.
But as academics point out, that sheer freedom of movement is a profound privilege in itself.
Absolutely.
So the debate remains, is the act of mainstreaming an underground culture inherently exploitative, or is it a vital form of visibility?
It's complicated, but for anyone listening who struggles with navigating pushback in their own career or trying to manage a personal brand, I think the practical lesson here isn't necessarily to go hand someone your underwear on national TV or to appropriate underground culture.
Right, don't do that.
No. The core lesson is about leverage. She built so much undeniable commercial value and structural power early on that she literally bought the immunity to take massive creative risks, fail publicly, and still have the resources to engineer a comeback.
And that brings us to what many critics consider her absolute magnum opus. Having navigated the worst backlash of her career, she returns in 1998 with the album Ray of Light.
Which is a staggering sonic pivot. She goes from the classical theater of Evita straight into studying Kabbalah and embracing underground electronica.
She described this period as a midlife enlightenment.
Yeah.
But mechanically, what she did was brilliant. She collaborated with producer William Orbit, and instead of just chasing the aggressive, repetitive techno-rave trends of the late 90s, she took a highly personal, lush singer-songwriter approach and laid it over electronic dance music.
Right.
She essentially dragged underground electronica right into the global pop mainstream.
And she sold over 16 million copies doing it.
Incredible.
From there, she just shifts into an entirely different stratosphere. She builds $1 billion touring empire. The sources note she became the first female performer in history to accumulate $1 billion strictly from concert tours.
The first female performer, yeah.
She is selling out massive stadiums globally, decade after decade, utilizing her intense physical discipline to put on shows that rival Olympic ceremonies.
But that level of physical output, maintained over 40 years, comes with a severe cost.
It does.
The human body has limits, even hers.
It really does, because in 2023, the world legitimately held its breath. She was found unresponsive in her New York home and had to be rushed to the ICU. She actually spent 5 days in a medically induced coma due to a severe bacterial infection.
It was a terrifying moment for the public. For an artist whose entire brand was built on physical invincibility, relentless stamina, and total control, being placed in a medically induced coma is the ultimate loss of control.
Yeah.
It's a very stark reminder of her mortality.
She's in her late 60s. She survives a coma. She literally has to learn how to stand up again. And yet, less than a year later, in 2024, she is closing out her celebration tour by playing to a record-setting 1.6 million fans on Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro.
1.6 million people.
Picture that for a second. 1.6 million people on a beach for one artist who was in a coma just months prior. That is not just pop music. That is sheer, terrifying human resilience.
It defies all conventional logic. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows exactly why she is the blueprint. Her career is an ongoing masterclass in reading the cultural zeitgeist, adapting to it seamlessly, and simply outworking absolutely everyone else in the room.
And looking at the 2026 timeline provided in our sources, she has zero intention of stopping.
Oh, not at all.
She is reportedly releasing a long-awaited sequel album, Confessions Gather. She is dropping a surprise collaboration with Sabrina Carpenter at Coachella, and she's slated to headline the 2026 FIFA World Cup final halftime show alongside Shakira and BTS.
Notice how she consistently collaborates with the current generation of stars. Like she did a track with a Weeknd and Playboy Cardi recently.
Right.
She absolutely refuses to be relegated to a legacy or a nostalgia act. She actively insists on inserting herself into the present culture.
So, what does this all mean for us? We started this deep dive looking at a young woman in 1978 shivering in a New York City winter with $35 to her name, trying to hustle club DJs to play her cassette tape.
Yep.
She didn't just survive that city. She fundamentally rewired the architecture of global culture. She took the machinery of pop music, which was historically designed to use young women up and throw them away.
Completely.
And she hijacked it for her own purposes.
And that leads to a really profound concept that sociologists use when they study her long-term impact. We've all heard of the term McDonaldization, right?
Sure, like the homogenizing spread of American corporate fast food culture across the globe.
Exactly. But academics actually use the term Madonization right alongside it.
Madonization.
Yes. It is a sociological shorthand for the way American mass culture, driven by big personalities, explicit sexuality, and constant, highly curated visual reinvention spread globally. She didn't just participate in the pop culture of the late 20th century. For better or worse, she became the global culture. She was the export that taught the rest of the world how modern celebrity functions.
She wrote the dictionary. So, the next time you see a modern pop star curating an era, whether they are deleting all their Instagram photos, changing their hair color, or dropping a provocative music video to signal a brand new sound, remember exactly whose playbook they're reading from. $35, an abandoned synagogue, and a whole lot of nerve.
They were all walking through doors that she had to kick down first.
Thanks for listening to Tipple Pod. Keep tuning in for more stories worth knowing.